Welcome, everybody. Tonight, we're going to be working on Chapter 14, which is the last chapter in our textbook. The topic is basically to look at JavaScript and one of the more important libraries that goes with JavaScript called jQuery. We're not digging deep into this technology in this class. We actually have a whole separate 3-credit course that we teach in JavaScript. This is just a kind of like a gentle introduction to it. It is often said that the 3 main languages of the internet that drive the whole thing are HTML, right? Structure and content, CSS for style and behavior, and then JavaScript, which is kind of like the secret sauce that makes everything work and does all these really powerful things. Basically, it gives you a programming language that works in the browser. Very much like Python, JavaScript is used, okay, not usage, and I apologize here, I'm waffling a little bit on my words, but JavaScript is not what we call a compiled language, so you don't create an executable. It is what we call an interpreted language, meaning it executes on the fly in the browser. So I'll show you how that works, but the main focus is to talk about JavaScript, how it basically operates, and then the auxiliary technology that often goes with it called jQuery, which is so common in JavaScript. We just kind of consider it part of JavaScript now, but it really is a separate library. So let's talk about where this, what it is, where it comes from. Now, the interesting thing is, and for those of you now that are taking a programming class, so if you are taking Python or Java, if you're in the web program, or if you happen to be an SD student and you're taking C#, you do learn about what we call object-oriented programming. And JavaScript is object-based, right? And it's not technically, we call it programming, but it's a scripting language, meaning like Python, it was designed to execute tasks, not necessarily write programs, right? But it really, you can create full-blown programs with it these days, and a lot of people do use it that way. The interesting thing about it is because it's object-based, everything that JavaScript does, everything within the language and everything that it contends with is considered an object. So in other words, we think of objects as things. So for example, they're pointing out the fact that like when you look at a browser, the window is an object. The document or the HTML file that you've loaded inside that browser is an object. The elements of that page, so if you have like paragraphs or headers or forms or media or whatever you put on that page, all of those things are objects too. And because it treats them like objects, JavaScript has the capability to manipulate any of those objects. So this is kind of like a deep thing if you start thinking about it. So if I put HTML on the page, JavaScript can change it or delete it or add to it or style it or make it jump around, literally, right? The same is true with the window or the document. It has the ability to interact and control those things. And this is what makes it so powerful. And in fact, a lot of web people would say, like, without JavaScript, the web's not the web. It's not the web that we know. It is possible in a browser, by the way. There's a switch in most browsers where you can turn off JavaScript. And then you go to a website, it's like, sorry, you can't see our webpage because you've turned off JavaScript, right? But a lot of people used to freak out and think that they would get viruses that way. Very not true, by the way. You get viruses basically by downloading stuff and installing stuff that isn't good, right? Where did it come from? Well, interestingly, back when browsers were brand new, and you remember the guys that developed Netscape are the guys that developed the first, fully graphical browser that worked in a mouse and a graphical operating system. They also developed Netscape, and they came up with a scripting language called LiveScript, right? And it was proprietary. It was their language. They came up with the concept. And then they realized that it was limited and they needed some help from some real programmers. So they contacted Sun Microsystems, and Sun Microsystems eventually got bought out and became Oracle. And Oracle is the company that controls technologies such as the Java programming language, Oracle databases, MySQL databases, and a bunch of other technologies. But their big programming language in Sun Microsystems was Java, right? And so they incorporated some Java-like features in JavaScript, and transitioned from the name LiveScript to JavaScript, which is stuck to this day. And they put the little caveat on here. So when you take your Java class, your instructor will say, Java is not JavaScript. And when you take your JavaScript class, your instructor says, JavaScript is not Java. They look a lot the same, but they're not. They're very different kinds of languages. The commonality really is the curly brackets and the semicolons and some of the syntax, you know. So like if you know Java, learning JavaScript, piece of cake, and vice versa, right? Very easy and quick to pick up. Also, if you're comfortable with Python, and all you guys are doing the Python class, that fits really well into it too. Like the ease and simplicity and kind of intuitive nature of Python is kind of built into JavaScript. The only difference is curly brackets and semicolons, right? Is kind of the big thing. Okay, what do we use it for? Anything that makes basically your web page interactive. So one big thing that we typically hate, right, is like you go to a website, a box pops up or an ad pops up. That's almost always done with JavaScript, by the way. When you have, let's say, a drop down menu and you click on something and it jumps you somewhere else, that's JavaScript. When I put in form data and I want to validate that the form data is in the correct format before I send it to my database, that's done with JavaScript. Notice some of the other things. You can create a new window with a specified size and screen position. You can also close windows or go back in history in your windows, or you can do goofy little things like image rollover. So you like hover over an image and it changes to something else, or you get status messages. You can also do things like tap into the system clock, or God forbid, math, right? So, you know, without JavaScript, we could never do math on a web page. And really, that's probably its most important feature because a lot of programming really is math. But it has that capability. So it really gives you, you know, makes your browser behave more like a real application window, like inside your operating system, is really ultimately what it does. Now, when you start coding JavaScript, there's a couple different ways to do it, right? The one way is, and a lot of people do it this way, is they'll take and they'll create script tags on their page and then put all their JavaScript code in between the script tag, kind of like we did with the style tags, if you remember that. And usually you put that at the top of your document. But the truth is with JavaScript, you can put it anywhere on your document. The other approach is to create an external file. You usually put a .js extension on it for JavaScript, and then you link to it just the same way that you link to a CSS file, except you're linking to a JavaScript file. So to kind of like just very quickly demonstrate these techniques, I am going to bring up Dreamweaver and just kind of show you how you might do this, just so you have a visual of it. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to like copy folders and all that goofy stuff. I think I'm going to take a look at one of my pages here where I could maybe throw it on. So, all right, let's take a live look at the pages first, I suppose would be smart. Let me see if I can just preview from here. All right, so this is my site. You know, as ugly as it is, this is what it is. And I have my maybe the whatever page is the page where I'll put a little JavaScript. All right, so I just wanted to check that before I do it. So I'll bring up my whatever page. And then what I'm referring to basically is I can create a script tag, put it up in the head section of the document. This is kind of the recommended place to put it, but it's not necessarily where people do put stuff. And then you can do really stupid little commands like document.write. And then inside parens here, I can put in like some HTML tags, like do an H2, say whatever, JavaScript, you know, just to make sure that you can see which one is generating it. And then you put a semicolon at the end, right? That's a statement. And then if I was writing functions or other stuff, then I use curly brackets, but we're not doing that. We're just keeping it very, very simple right now. And then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to refresh, and I'm not sure where that ended up. Oh, right up at the top here. So it ended up above my header. Not a great place for it, right? So, but it worked, right? So super simple example of JavaScript, running inside a script tag. The weird thing is because the script tag really doesn't have to be in the head section, you can cut that out, and I can just put it somewhere on anywhere really on my page. So like I could put it in the middle of these line breaks, right? And it'll still work. And it's not the prettiest thing in the world, right? And really the indenting is horrible, but whatever, right? Appropriate for this content, I suppose. So save that, come back, refresh, and you can see I can drop stuff on a page. And this is a very simple document write command, but JavaScript can do a whole lot more. I just want to show you that you can use script tags. You can drop it anywhere on a page. There's lots of different strategies for this. The other approach is you can also do, like we did the link for the style sheet, I can also do a link. I can say what's the relation to the document, and I can say, no, and it's not coming up. I think that's pretty interesting. Okay, well, I know why. Okay, so I think you have to say type. There you go. Wrong code, right? So you say text type JavaScript, and then you put in an href, and you link to your JavaScript file, whatever that's called, right? And then instead of having the JavaScript here, it's on a separate thing, just like your CSS file is, and you can just put your code there, and it still works, by the way, if you do it that way. So those are the basic two approaches for including JavaScript on a web page. Right. So one common little thing that we do is kind of like a first little JavaScript thing. And if you guys want, and believe it or not, this is all it takes. Add this to one of your pages, right, to get that extra credit for doing the chapter 14 stuff. You can do this very simple alert. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to drop it onto the page, right? And I'm going to omit the link thing for right now, but I'm just going to put that right up here at the top. So you see the alert, and this is probably considered like the most primitive type of approach to doing a little pop-up box. But since the Packers are playing tonight, we can do a little like message and just say, "Go Packers." Sorry, Juan. Crush the Lions. Okay, thank you. All right, so very, very simple.
Put money on that? I'm just
what's
kidding.
That? Oh,
said for the game tonight.
You're razzing me a little bit here, right? Right. You can make fun of me next week after we talk, right?
All right.
No, we won't.
Oh yeah, we won't talk tomorrow. Next week.
We won't, right? But you know what, Ryan? You can always reach out. That's fine. Right. Now, when I go to reload the page, I want to show you what happens here. This is an alert box, right? And you see this on pages sometimes, right? And they're always annoying, right? And notice, because this loaded up in the head section of the document, the rest of the page won't load until I hit OK, right? And that box goes away. If I take that alert box and I put it at the bottom, it will first load the page and then pop up the alert box. So like you can do it either way. But given the fact, at least, and I'm saying this just for extra credit, you guys, this is super, super easy to do. Add it to one of your pages on your final project, and you'll get an extra credit point. Do the chapter 14 case study, which is about like this difficult, and you also get some more extra credits. So don't refrain from doing that, especially if you need the points. But for the final project, you add that and you get an extra credit point. Hey, why not, right? What I do recommend, though, is if you do put it in the final project, give me a little note that you did, so I know. Because I do try to check every page, but sometimes I miss, where that stuff is. Right. So that's an example. All right. One of the things that really drives the whole JavaScript thing is this underlying technology that we call the document object model, right? Because we're doing, if JavaScript treats everything like an object or a thing, basically. We have to kind of create a hierarchy or a structure for those things. And the grand point of it is basically that anything within the DOM that we describe as an object, we can manipulate with the JavaScript code, right? And so what the DOM can attach itself to is basically anything on this list, including a lot more detail in the document part, but you can control the window. So like I can have JavaScript that closes the browser window or opens a new one, right? Or a new tab. That's possible. I can have JavaScript that takes me back in my history, like go back 2 clicks in the user's history. Done, right? You can do that. So I can access the history. And this is one of the weird things, right? So people can write JavaScript code to also look at your browser history. So if you have a history of looking at nefarious websites, the websites you're visiting know that, right? So keep that in mind, right? If you want, you can use JavaScript to change the location. So I can tell it to go, well, we're on this page right now, but JavaScript's going to send us somewhere else. And you can do that. The other thing that it can probe is the browser itself. So we call that the navigator. Why? Okay, where does that come from? The very first browser, Mosaic and Netscape, Netscape was called Netscape Navigator, and Mosaic called its browser a navigator as opposed to a browser initially. But that basically refers to the browser itself. So like the underlying structure of the browser. And we can probe that information and ask, okay, what browser are you using? Which version? And you can even take it further. You can also get like the IP address, the operating system. You can probe that and pull that information back with JavaScript. So when somebody visits your website, you can go, oh, hey, look, half of my visitors are coming in on Android phones. The other half are coming in on Windows PCs. There's 5% come in on Apple or whatever, right? And you can get that information. It's very helpful for designers. The part that we normally attribute with JavaScript, though, is this branch, which is the document branch, which means the HTML file itself and all the tags and attributes of the tags. So just to clarify what that means, I can use JavaScript to even create a whole page, right? Or to manipulate any of the tags or things on this page, including, like, for example, if I wanted to make this H1 appear and disappear, I could make JavaScript do that. Or I could use JavaScript to apply a CSS style that happens after you log in or something weird like that. But not only can it control the tag or the contents of the tag, but it can also control the attributes of the tag. And styles are included in that. So I can inject styles. I can inject other JavaScript. That's kind of weird. But I can, like if this says, hey, that link is taking us to index. Now I can change that link and take us to about, that kind of thing. So really, really kind of crazy powerful in that regard. And JavaScript has access to all of this stuff, right? They talk about what an object is, right? And I usually tend to reserve that more for object-oriented programming class, but the whole concept is an object is a thing, right? So the window's a thing, a submit button's a thing, the web page is a thing, that paragraph is a thing, that picture is a thing, the attributes you put on it is a thing. You can control all of it, right? So one crazy kind of thing that you can do. So for example, like if I take a document, right, and I want to change the background color, JavaScript's got a way to do that. If I want to go back to the previous version of that web page when it was last modified, I can do that. I can pull up that version. Or if I want to, want the source file of an object, I can pull that back. All of it is possible. Also, the other thing that happens is we often use what we call functions or methods in programming, which you guys are familiar with. There's some functions that are built in, like document write is kind of like print in Python, or system out print line in Java, right? If you're learning those languages, or console write line in C#. And I can also write JavaScript that automatically submits a form. How do you like that? Pretty cool, right? And then you can also write your own functions and methods that you can call and reuse, right? So I think that's kind of neat. JavaScript often is triggered by events on the screen. So sometimes we have JavaScript that just loads up when the page comes up. So you load the page, boom, the JavaScript is running with the alert box. Or very often we take JavaScript and we attach it to events that the user is performing on the screen. So for example, they might like click on something and then you can trigger JavaScript. Or as soon as the page loads, you can trigger some JavaScript. Or if I hover my mouse over something, I can trigger some JavaScript. Now, when you think about, I want you to think about this. So I can just take my mouse, I can write a piece of code where I can take my mouse, move it over something, and that triggers something to happen. Yeah, totally. What can I trigger? Any of the stuff I talked about before, you can trigger with an action like that. So these are some of the what we call basic event handlers, and this is really why it's saved for kind of level 2, because event handlers are kind of like a conceptual thing that we do when we're dealing with graphical programming. So when you guys do like your Java 2 class or your advanced Python class or whatever, and you're dealing with graphical interactions like mouse movements and clicks, or if you're thinking about mobile, tap, double tap, pinch and zoom and twist and all those kind of things that you do on a phone, or like 2-finger scrolls or whatever, those are all events that you can write code for with JavaScript. And whatever the event happens to be, there's an event handler built into JavaScript. So I can say on click, load, portrait of the victorious Packers, or something like that. All right. But I think what's pretty interesting, and this is kind of crazy. So you could try this approach, for example. You can add some of the event handlers directly to a tag. I don't recommend this approach, but it does work. And so if I have like a link and then I hover over that link, an alert box would pop up. Talk about annoying, but you know what? I'm going to totally do it. So you could copy this code and try this too. And let's put it in a spot where I can easily find it, maybe like right under the whatever page. And this is like a bogus link. It doesn't really go anywhere, but that's not about the link. It's about the JavaScript, right? And actually I could make it do this, right? Right, so we can save that. Let's go back to the browser, take a quick look. Let's refresh. Okay, so we got the one alert box, and now I have this, which I dropped on the page, right? Normally you would go click on it, but the moment I move my mouse over, I got an alert box. Very annoying, by the way. And it doesn't actually take me there, but whatever. I can click that to go home, but try clicking it when every time the box, you can't. Right? It's a conundrum. Don't do this on your page, but just an example, that's an event handler, very simple one. And any movement you make with a mouse on the screen, click, double click, drag, drop, scroll, click and drag, all that stuff. You can write events for it and trigger JavaScript. And that's where it gets crazy powerful, you guys. Now, the only thing that ends up limiting you ultimately is your imagination as to what you can do with that stuff, right? But the reason you have to learn all that HTML, CSS, and stuff first is because if that stuff's not right and in place, throwing JavaScript on top of it is just making a mess, So the other thing that, what happens is when you do start running JavaScript, right? So for example, I have JavaScript on this page. You can actually trigger, the code. You can look at your JavaScript. This is kind of weird. I can't obscure JavaScript from people looking at my page. So if I have JavaScript that does something, people can see it just like they can see your CSS or your HTML. It's not obscured, right? However, right, that's the view source mode. If I go into the inspect mode, right, in the browser, we bring up the inspect panel, which I'm hoping you guys are using more and more these days. It becomes very helpful when you're working on real projects, by the way. But all of the inspect tools have what they call a console. And what this is, and this will smack a little bit of Python for the Python people, is I can do crazy things that go 2 + 2, and it gives me the answer, right? Or I can put in another command, like something that does something like document, oops, and you see I made a mistake. The point of this ultimately is that if you make a mistake, there's a debugger built in and it tells you what the error is. All right, I was just trying to type document gosh, like I'm betting one more and I'm out, right? I'm going to go really, really slow here. DOCUMENT dot right. And then I'm just going to do a, hey, right? I'm not even putting an HTML tag in there. Technically, I should, but if I execute that command, check out what it does. It just pushes right to the browser, right there. So this is your console. What you can do with your console is you can literally, and you can do this with Python too, right? You can just type a command and it executes it, right? And so like if I did like, that alert or whatever, I could copy that in here, press enter, and it would run in the browser. So the console is kind of like a little mini programming environment. You're not really writing a document of code, but you can try code here, right? More importantly, if your web page has errors in the code, the errors will appear here in the console. So like when we write like Python code or Java code and you run the program and it throws an error, you have a little console at the bottom that says, hey, error on line 5, so and so. The same thing here, but the browser is your debugger, right? I will argue real strongly that the Google Chrome one is great. Microsoft Edge console is great. I do think that the Firefox one is the best one now when it comes down to doing JavaScript work. So just take that with a grain of salt, right? Um, and you see the author also recommends that. So they have an error console, but you can get to it through the inspect tool, basically. JavaScript, like a lot of other programming languages, has rules, right? And you have to follow the syntax rules, so like if you're naming something, you have to be consistent, upper and lowercase matter. The way that built-in functions and object calls are done is pretty strict, so you have to follow the rules of the language generally. The grand point though is if you do write JavaScript and it's not working quite right, you can go into the browser, look at the console, and it will show you where the error is. And notice it'll even say alert.html line 10 column 2 is what that means, right? So 2 spaces in from the margin is where the error is occurring. And it's really helpful when you write JavaScript. So when you guys do that JavaScript class, you'll get a whole bunch of this and you'll use the tool a lot. And JavaScript, arguably is, the most important language of the web in terms of like functionality and making something work like an app, which is generally what we want, right? Now, we are reasonably moving through this at a pretty decent pace. I'm going to like hit upon some of these other topics here, and then we'll take a break. But some of the things that you learn about JavaScript is the same thing you learn about other languages. So these are going to go pretty quick, these next couple of slides here, next bunch of slides. So the first thing I'm going to say is that JavaScript, like regular programming languages, allows for variable declarations, and you can use the keyword var to create a variable, or you can just like Python, just name it and use it. It doesn't care what goes in. So that's where JavaScript and Python are very similar. I can create a variable called whatever. I can throw a number in there. I can throw a word in there. I can throw an object in there. It doesn't care, just like Python, right? Prompts. So here's another thing, like instead of an alert box, you can also do something like this. You can do a prompt. And when, well, if you guys want to try that, you can take that one and throw it into your code. So for example, I can do an alert, and then I can do a prompt, right? And let's go ahead and save and run this. Refresh. Oh, it doesn't like it. Apparently I got some sort of an error here. And I think it's probably the variable name it doesn't like. Oh, no. Even sillier. I copied from the PowerPoint. You guys like check out the double quotes. See how they're curly instead of straight up and down? Those are called smart quotes. That doesn't work in a programming language, by the way. So you gotta replace those whenever you see them. Okay, now it'll work. Saving. refreshing, right? So that was my alert box. Here's the prompt box. See the difference? This one I can type a message in, and when I say okay, it actually stores in this variable, and then I can do, for example, just cannot type the word document today. Document.write, and then I can throw that variable name in here.
You got to fix your alert.
Why? Because the game already started. And
No, it's gonna go the other way.
yeah, well, I know you're rubbing it in because the Lions are like the favorite to win it all for sure, right? And then I can write that back, and I'm not sure where that's ending up here. Probably somewhere I can't see it right here. So that's what I typed into the prompt. So like really, really basic stuff, right? But see how powerful that is? Like, so you can have somebody land on your web page, prompt them and say, hey, what's your name? And then you can say, hey, Joe. That's kind of cool, actually, right? When you start to think about it. And maybe you do something more meaningful, like what is your name, right? And then instead of putting this here so it appears somewhere we can't see it, we could put it here, and I could be smart and put that inside of tags. So I could and well, actually this has to go in a script tag, so you got to be smart about this. Script, like so. Document write goes inside of it. And then I should probably, and this, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here. We'll just do this because I can do it a number of different ways. I can put HTML tags inside here, or I can put HTML tags around it. That both of them work, by the way. I'll just wrap the HTML tag around it. Right. And then we'll save. We'll go back and run. This time, the Packers will win. And what is our name? I don't know. Packers rule, something like that. Right. And then you'll see on the web page, right? Packers rule. So very, very simple implementations of JavaScript, but I'm showing you the power of it, right? That capability is super easy to learn too, I think, compared to a lot of the languages that get thrown at you when you take programs like this. JavaScript can do math, all the same operators that we see basically in most programming languages. We also have comparison operators, all the stuff, same stuff, right? So like greater than or not equal, or equal is the equivalent thing, where a regular equal is assigning a quantity to a variable, so same rules as Python or Java, basically. There's if statements, so you can do ifs and else's. Notice the curly brackets. Conditions go inside of parentheses. We can also create functions. We call them functions. We give the function a name, put parentheses, and then you have your JavaScript statements. And like other programming languages, functions can return values and receive values, and you can reuse them, right? So that's kind of cool. So here's an example of a function. So I can create a function that says show alert, throw my alert in there, and then I can just write a script somewhere that says show alert, right? And then it triggers this. So really super basic. Another thing that, in the old days, we did a lot of, right? And so like the first time I ever taught a JavaScript class, I remember very vividly. Basically, the whole point of the class mostly was to take form data and to validate the contents. That was like the majority of the class. And JavaScript is still used for that. And so the reason that we do that is if you're running a web page and you're getting information from your user, and then that information goes into your database. And if you're taking a database class, you know how finicky a database can be about the info that goes into it. Like there's data types in the database. JavaScript was used as a tool to make sure that it's like, okay, enter your phone number and somebody types whatever, or enter your name and they type their phone number. It's kind of prevent silly stuff like that from happening. Generally, you can use very simple scripts to do that. This is something you will learn in your JavaScript class, so I'm not going to demonstrate it. But you can just basically check to see if like the username on a form is empty, right? And then you can throw up an alert. Name can't be empty, right? So you can get really creative with that stuff. I will tell you that since HTML5 came out, and because we can do things like requiring content on a HTML form, or even doing regular expressions on the input, a lot of this has kind of gone away, but people still do use it. The one thing you always have to be aware of with JavaScript is people do have the capability to turn it off, right? So that's an issue, right? Now, one of the really neat things that happened with JavaScript kind of in the mid 2000s, somewhere in that range, is we had this company called Google come around, and they were using JavaScript to power their websites a lot. They use a lot of JavaScript, to the point where they developed this library called jQuery that they still are, the main proponents of this. But it was the technology of jQuery combined with a couple of other technologies that made Google so able to rapidly develop its stuff so much faster than other people. And you can go to these websites here, by the way, to read up on it or download the libraries. Google also has a repository of this that you can just link to on your web page, and then you can use jQuery syntax. But the power of jQuery is that generally when we're writing JavaScript code, I usually have to refer to an object by its name or ID. But with jQuery, I can use CSS selector. So if I want to apply like something to a paragraph, I just use a P. Or if I want to have it attached to a form, I just use the form tag, right? Like the same selectors you would use for CSS, classes, IDs, parent, sibling, or descendants, or like advanced CSS stuff, all can be used. But jQuery automated a lot of stuff that people would do and save a significant amount of time. So for example, if I wanted to put something on a web page and hide it with JavaScript, I'd have to probably write 5-10 lines of code. With jQuery, I would just say paragraph, hide, it's done. It's like that easy. And so really what jQuery is, it's a library of functions. Really, it's an API of stuff that you would normally do on a web page. And it just makes it so much easier to do stuff. And it really was the secret sauce that made Google boom. If you want to incorporate jQuery on your web page and you learn the syntax and stuff, you can either download it and attach the files to your project, or what most programmers do is they just use one of the Google libraries. This is a pretty old library here, but they have more modern ones. All you need to do is find the correct link. You drop that in the top part of your document, and you starting to use jQuery code. What jQuery code looks like is basically like this, right? All of it is prefaced with a $sign, and then in a set of parentheses, you put your CSS selector. This would affect the whole HTML document, but I could alternately do like this, like P for paragraph, and that would affect just a paragraph. And what this command that you see up here at the top right now, the document ready function, is basically saying after your document loads, do this JavaScript, and you can put whatever jQuery in there. So for example, I could put regular JavaScript inside of my jQuery. Weird, but it's a thing. But more important, the focus really is on this, right? That jQuery makes it easier because we're using the CSS selectors that we already know. So here's some examples, right? So if I want to, put it on everything, I use the star. Or if I want to put it on a list item or a class or an ID, I can do that. Or if I have just my navigation links, I can do it, right? You just use the same CSS, right? So you don't have to like go, oh, I got to take all those links and put classes on them, and then I can, no, you can just refer to it the same way you do in your CSS. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it became so popular so quickly. You can use methods. So they have all these, like, these are just examples, right? jQuery has hundreds of methods, but some of the ones that are used very often, right? Like if you hover, or here's one. Oh my God, I once built a website and it took me forever to figure out how to do this with JavaScript. And then I learned the jQuery approach, and it was one line of code. And it was basically click on something and it disappears. You click on it again and it comes back. It toggle does that in jQuery. So my 20 lines of JavaScript code out the window, 1 line of jQuery, right? And so cool, right? Here's another example. So when the document loads, we find the A tags, and when anybody clicks a link tag, then we trigger a function. It's an anonymous function that takes all the list items, the even numbered ones, and changes their CSS color to whatever this is, red, green, some shade of green, right? And that's what it does. So anytime I would click a link, it would turn the link green. Pretty cool, right? Very short amount of code, but it has a really neat effect. Here's the toggle method. For example, this is the one that kind of drove me crazy. But when I figured this out, I mean, it was just so much of a time saver. And what toggle does is, like, you have something here, you click the more, and then more stuff shows up. Here's an example of how to do that, right? So totally easy to do. You can also create things like image galleries. This gets a little bit more advanced. You got to be really careful with your coding. Totally possible to do, though. And basically what that does is allows you to have little icons, click on them, big pictures come up on the side. If you're looking, to check on the jQuery plugins, I'm not really a big fan of taking the jQuery code and adding it to my website. I'm much more of a fan of linking to the Google APIs for it, real frankly. Just make sure there are version differences. So make sure you work with the right version. That's basically it, folks. Like, you can do, like, here's an example of validation, right? In the old days, we'd write JavaScript. So, like, if you leave it empty, then a little message comes up, and now we can do that with HTML. So it kind of makes it kind of a moot point, right? That was my super quick chapter 14 lecture. So this recording